NES,
Classic.
SNES,
Classic.
PlayStation,
Classic.
Coca-Cola,
Classic.
Citizen Kane,
Classic.
PC,
Classic?
hot take.
I remember back in the old days when if you wanted to play a video game, you needed to buy a $3,000 computer.
What?
There would be no 3D graphics.
Hey!
You didn't have a mouse.
Eh!
You had a keyboard.
What?
Clickety-clack.
Eh!
Did your taxes on it.
The PC Classic is maybe going to be a thing?
Maybe. I am so... Look, folks... we have seen a lot of classic systems come out recently, and they've made a lot of sense, okay? An NES Classic had a huge audience. The SNES Classic does.
Huge audience.
And no doubt the PlayStation Classic
We can't
is
forget
also
the
gonna
Neo
have
Geo
that.
Mini.
Neo
was
Geo
a
Mini,
thing.
yes.
The Genesis is coming out with a thing. And then we have other companies that are digging into the nostalgia factor. Analog is making some really good stuff.
Atari VCS has a focus on playing original Atari games. There's a lot of stuff out there,
Oh my
okay?
gosh. Yeah, it just keeps going.
Yeah, it really does. But the thing is, with a lot of these systems we've seen, it was the way to play those games was simplified drastically, okay?
Yes.
They weren't really big, expensive computers. They were cheaper devices that a lot of people picked up, and the way you played them was usually a power button and a controller that made things simple. But one company wants to add something new to the mix, and that is being called the PC Classic.
Yes, and the company, let me say their name very properly, Unit E.
Yes.
Not Unity.
Not Unity, the
Unity.
very popular game engine.
Apparently, this company had come up with this name in 2005 before the Unity 3D engine was a thing. So they're like, no, we're sticking to our guns. We're going to be Unit E and deal with PC things, and everyone's going to know we are we because we make stuff.
Cool.
I don't know.
Look,
I
folks.
really don't know.
A PC Classic is a very different proposition, okay?
Yes, it is.
Adam,
There's so many factors here.
you used to play PC games back
Yes,
in the
I
day.
did.
I
Yes,
used
I
to
did.
play... I still play PC games. In fact, I play PC games all the time. But when I was growing up, despite the fact I had an NES, despite the fact I had a Sega Genesis and all that other fun stuff, I also had a PC. Wasn't a great one, real cheap too. Couldn't really afford the best of the best. I remember my first computer had a green monitor. Like,
I
it
had
didn't
one
have
of those
multiple-
too. Yeah.
So like, that makes me sound like I'm super old. No, it's just we couldn't afford the best computer. That was the thing we got. So I remember playing games on that PC a lot. A lot of those games you had to learn how to use DOS to operate. Many of those games, I remember my first computer didn't have Windows, which is a visual-based operating system. If you're familiar with what a mouse looks like, basically, I didn't have Windows. I had a line of code I would have to write to get a game to start.
Every time you got a game to start, it felt like wizardry. It felt like you were solving the greatest math problem ever.
Back in my day, before I knew how to spell, I would keep a dictionary by the computer to know how to spell certain words.
Dude, no, I'd keep notes so that I could type in the right things. Okay, so this company, Unit E, they're bringing the PC Classic. They're trying to bring it to the masses, okay? But they're just sort of starting this whole thing out. They presented a video on YouTube. It's kind of their intro video. Not the greatest, most professional video in the world. I mentioned that it sounds like a babbling brook is right next to the person that is showing you this mini console. And the device itself is like the first sort of prototype unit. So we're seeing something that's very much like it has a 3D printed faceplate.
Oh, yeah.
There's a lot of roughness here, okay?
Look, folks, if this isn't a Raspberry Pi, I would be shocked, okay? What they're talking about, by the way, is the idea that there was a lot of really good classic PC games that never had a representation on consoles, and that is 100% true.
Right.
Yeah.
So they're aiming for to look at titles that were released more like in the later 80s or early 90s.
Yes.
And in their video, they showcased a few of these games. Now, they're trying to license at least 30 games for this unit, but every demo that they showed was unlicensed.
Yeah.
So it was almost like they were like, look, it works, and these are the games we would want on it if we could license them. So they're showing games like Quake 2, Doom, Commander Keen.
Now, technically, they could give away the shareware versions of these games legitimately. There's no problem with that. Shareware is way back in the day, we had demos. But on the PC, the way you'd have a demo, I think id Software was one of the first companies to really try this out.
Yeah, I believe it was the first. But correct us if we're wrong.
So the idea was shareware was basically you would take a game. Let's just say a game had like 3 chapters. You'd give away the first chapter as shareware. So all your friends could like take the games, copy them on disc, share them around. It was a really interesting time because you got to play all these games. I remember going to stores, buying discs of like 20 or 30 shareware games you could bring back home, and then when you got them home and realized they weren't the full game, you'd scream. And I remember doing that. And that's the kind of stuff that they could do now if they really want to, but I firmly believe that they should be including the full versions of the games, and that's where licensing becomes an issue.
Right, and I believe that's what they're planning. Do you want me to dig a little bit more into the specs of this sucker? I got them written down. So they're going to be, this is going to be a unit that's capable of playing DOS games on your TV. They're concentrating pretty heavily on DOS, right? So it's going to come like pre-configured to work, so you don't have to tweak things. That's their thing. It's like plug-and-play console, like the other sort of classic units that we're used to. It's going to be compatible with joystick, keyboard, mouse. They're going to have a very simple GUI or graphical user interface, right? So they want to make things, again, as streamlined as possible, so you can have the same sort of classic experience with this. $99 price point is what they're aiming for. Gonna try to bundle it with a gamepad, and this is going to be one of those crowdfunded suckers. So I don't know if you dig crowdfunding, but this very much seems like a product that needs to be crowdfunded. This is a small group of people. It's like a 5-person team with like a dozen contractors or something. They have made hardware in the past. They've made software in the past, but nothing that many people have heard of.
Yeah. Now, this is kind of funny. I want to bring this up. The company that did this, of course, when we talk about something like this, the first thing that people would bring up is, can I just build one of these myself?
Oh,
they had an answer.
Okay. So this is
true. This is
from their FAQ, and I wouldn't read this out unless it gave me a bit of a chuckle. So, can I just buy a Raspberry Pi? Can I just buy a Raspberry Pi, an enclosure, gamepad, keyboard and mouse, 3D print a faceplate, install Armbian, buy 30+ games, build the source for ARM, or install configure in DOSBox for each and every game, create a menu system with game art, and tell everyone about it at parties? Their response? No.
Yeah. So look.
Well, yes, you can, right? But there's a lot of hassle there. That's what they're aiming for. These guys are cheeky.
The average consumer isn't going to go out and build their own Raspberry Pi unit, or like go out and buy Raspberry Pi, program the thing. Right. In most cases, with Raspberry Pi, you don't actually have to program it. You just go online, download something to an SD card, flash the card, and then use that as, and you just put it and you start up and it boots, right? It's not crazy difficult, but it's difficult enough for some people not to be able to do. With that in mind, though, okay, I'm not against them making this thing, but there are a couple of things I've really been thinking about ever since hearing about this.
Ditto.
Okay.
Ditto. You want to go?
Well, I've got a ton of Raspberry Pi machines, and they all run these games already easily. And so here's something. I'm a big fan of GOG.com. I own many of these games directly from that source. So that source gives you DRM-free versions of these games, and I can download them and basically scrape out the files I want, put them on my Raspberry Pi, and just runs them.
Yeah. So one of the things that I started thinking about was that, we have the SNES Classic, the PlayStation Classics coming out. What were those experiences for you when you were a kid? How did you play those?
In front of my TV.
In front of your TV, right? And that's how you play those classic consoles now. You bring those to parties and stuff, and you play it on the TV. But back in the day, where'd you play your computer games? You played them, in your computer room with your desk and your keyboard and all your other stuff.
Yeah.
If you're digging for nostalgia in sort of rose-tinted glasses, I think, this audience didn't have the connect to your TV and play with a joystick experience. Not to say that this won't work, just to say that this isn't quite, the audience might not be what you think it is here. I don't know if this is, if this device looks good and it plays things well, I could see buying it, but I don't believe this is a thing that I would really have connected to my TV, my entertainment system, something that I would be playing with other people in the same room.
Now, I'm biased. These games I bought back in the day, many of them I own in newer forms now. I own these games. I likely wouldn't be buying this thing for myself because I don't have a use for it. I play I've modded Doom several times. I remember I modded Doom so that it could look like a Ghostbusters experience at one point. Like, I've done so much with all these old games, and I don't believe that I will see a benefit from this, because I actually think I get a better experience playing these games on my modern computer using things like DOSBox. To have this thing exist for people out there that are just average consumers, the problem was when these games came out, the people that played them were not the average consumers at the time. They were a little bit more tech heavy because they understood how to use computers a little bit more. To give them a box that will represent these older games again is neat, but taking it in front of the TV, that's not what these games were.
Right. We do kind of have an example of one of these things in the wild right now, because we do have the Commodore 64. It's the Mini, right?
We do.
Commodore 64 Mini. And while that device does have its positives, it does have its merits, a lot of that experience was lost on me. I didn't grow up with a Commodore 64, so maybe that's part of it, but it felt like it wasn't a made-for-television experience. And they do seem like they're going to try to streamline this more, so it's more plug-and-play. The Commodore 64 had some weird controls and stuff, but
there were some people that would have used the Commodore 64 on a television in front of in their living room, right? So there is that experience there. That definitely would have been a thing for some people.
Maybe it's just lost on me then.
PCs, though, that was a different thing. PCs, okay, there were certain PCs released with a video out cable. I actually had one that had that ability, but I never did that. If I wanted the best looking image possible at the time, even though I wasn't completely aware of those things, I used a VGA cable that went directly to a monitor, and that was just the way it is. To sit in front of my TV at the time, I would have had to take a keyboard, I would have had to take a mouse, and sit there with that on like a coffee table or something, and I remember the lines weren't long enough for that. Usually you would have to have the desktop really close. Like, I come from a time long past where when you got a desktop, in my case, my desktop, my first one, was a box you put the monitor on top of. So everything came out really close just behind. You didn't use USB then, it was PS2 ports. So not PlayStation 2, it's something different. But look, what you're getting here, simplified. You're getting USB inputs, right? You still have composite video out.
Let me dig into that, because I didn't talk about the actual physical hardware. So 2 USB ports on the front, 1 on the back, HDMI out and composite out as well, Bluetooth support, and we believe that the games are going to be used on SD cards.
Yeah. So I mentioned the Bluetooth support is going to be basically for the controllers. Yeah.
Keyboards?
Now
joysticks?
This is interesting because they were showing a couple of games there. All the games they showed, I'm aware of. I used to play Jill the Jungle all the time when I was a kid. It was a really interesting game. Kind of like my first experience into playing a character like Lara Croft. It's kind of like, exploration, but very much a platformer. These games that they showed off, you could play with a Gravis gamepad. The one they showed off that you really wouldn't want to do that with would have been something like Quake. Quake ran with a mouse and a keyboard, free look around and stuff like that. You could play it with just a keyboard if you really wanted to, but to get the height aiming up and down, you'd have to push page up and page down. It wasn't the most fun experience. So I can't imagine having that in front of a TV without, like, you could play it with a controller, but some of the beauty of this is using the original mouse and keyboard. That's what makes that experience what it is.
So one thing that I do want to state, control-wise, is that they do seem to be relying pretty heavily on joystick controls, or they've mentioned it quite a bit in their sort of proposal for this machine. And playing some of those games like Quake with the joystick, if they did wind up getting the license to that wouldn't appeal to me.
Sure. Like, I mean, there are going to be some games out there. I know this is going to sound ridiculous, but there will be games, even though from what I could tell, they were using a PlayStation 2-like controller on this thing.
Yeah, I think it was a Logitech controller. Yeah.
You're going to get through games like XCOM and certain ones like that, and I'm talking old XCOM, that require a keyboard. Look, it doesn't matter how many buttons you've got on a controller. Many of these games used the full keyboard. Like, they used every button you could. And I really feel that that's something that you kind of remove. Now, if they're going for the more, I don't want to call them the normie games, but it's like the games that were, my friend's coming over, I'm just going to put on Doom so that they can play. And then when they leave, you're like, all right, now it's time to play XCOM. Now it's time to play, any number of games that are far more difficult. I would never, ever want to use a key or a controller to play something like SimCity,
Right.
like the original, I would want a mouse for that.
Yeah, so this thing, out of the box, I believe it should have like a mini keyboard and a mouse, which they are talking about possibly having with it. But if not, they need heavy curation on this list. If you're going to have 30 plus games and you're going to release it with a gamepad or something, that gamepad better work very well with each of those games, right?
Yeah.
That was a problem that we did have with the Commodore, the Mini, was that we had some control issues and we needed a keyboard at some points. And
Yes.
there's a little sloppy there.
I mean, look, there's a wealth of amazing DOS games from the past that are very worthwhile to take a look at. And in some cases, the PC versions of many of these games were the far superior version compared to the things we saw on consoles. Sure. When it came to Doom, the best version of Doom, still in my opinion, is Doom on PC.
Yep.
I know there's a lot of people out there that like a specific version that had been changed, but that's the original creating team's vision of what Doom should be, and that's why it's best on that platform.
Right. Doom bounced around from console to console, and it was never quite as good as on the PC until much later in later consoles.
And I mean, like, the need for this to exist is confusing to me only because if you have something like this, you could download DOSBox on your phone and use a keyboard and mouse, like a Bluetooth keyboard and mouse on that, and run it that way.
Right.
You can run many classic DOS games on your Macintosh now using DOSBox. Or, heck, if you want it to be super simple, I think the name of this thing's called Boxer. It's this program for Mac where you literally take the file folder of what the game is and you drag it over the Boxer icon. Then Boxer self-installs, turns it into a condensed package, and it creates the game into an icon that you can just boot.
That sounds super simple.
Right? That's really crazy easy, and these are things that already exist. If you wanted to play Jill of the Jungle, Quake, Doom, any of the really cool packages of Apogee games from the past, or any of those classic vintage games, you could literally use a 10 to 15-year-old computer and they would still run those games at top settings perfectly right now. Right?
Yeah.
You don't really need this box to do that.
Right, that's the thing. They're aiming for an audience that doesn't want to deal with computers. But the thing is, the audience that had played those originally was dealing with computers, and most likely they evolved along with where computer tech had led. Like I think they're assuming that there was a cutoff where people were like, well, I haven't really played PC games since I was like 10, but I really liked Commander Keen back then, so maybe those are the folks that they hope pick this up. I don't know that there's enough of those people out there. But I guess they're willing to take the risk and check it out.
Yeah, well, folks, what do you think? Personally, for me, I'm a PC gamer. I want to play PCs on a PC, or PC games on a PC.
Just a couple games. What would you want to see on this thing?
Oh, geez. Well, Dune. Dune, one of my favorite games.
Yeah.
Dune 2.
Yeah. We're thinking Command & Conquer likes, but Dune did it first.
Yeah, Command & Conquer, Dune, Red Alert.
I wrote down that game Wetlands. Does anyone remember Wetlands besides me?
Yeah.
It's a shooter.
Yeah. There's a lot of great FPS games on there. Blakestone.
Go ahead.
Yeah, Blakestone was a really good one. Obviously, the Wolfenstein 3D collection of games and the experience there was really cool. If you really want to go really old school with much older DOS games, when you get to EGA graphics and SVGA graphics and stuff like that, or not SVGA, but like way back when, you'll get really cool old games that have this distinct feel. Like with a box like this, I could only imagine that you'd really want to have something like I don't know, Cross Country USA, Cross Country Canada, like these really old games that really do use a keyboard.
Yeah.
Hugo, Adventures of Hugo and stuff like that, right?
Yeah, I don't know if we're going to be digging that deep. I wonder if they could possibly get like the original Grand Theft Auto and get that to work with a simplified controller interface. I don't know if that would work.
Well, sure, you could. I mean, like Grand Theft Auto, Grand Theft Auto,
you can play it on the PlayStation.
Yeah, right. You can play it with a controller, and I think you could do it back then too. It's just it's a different experience. It's a different idea.
Heroes of Might and Magic.
And look, if you're going to get Grand Theft Auto, you have to get the rights to Grand Theft Auto.
I know.
These problems with some of these DOS games are coming into the idea that, look, when it comes to Sony and Nintendo and Sega, they may have actually had a hand in developing these games that they re-release, but PC was just PC.
It was a bit of a Wild West, right?
Yeah. There's no real PC developer. Like, that doesn't exist. IBM may have made a PC classic, right? But then they didn't actually make any of the games on the PC. So it's kind of difficult. If these guys are going to be successful, they need to establish early on some kind of relationship that they're building with a company out there that has rights to these games, because you can show the shareware stuff on your video, which they have, but that doesn't really mean that's not a promise of what's going to come.
That's basically, this is what we want. Anyway, they're starting their Kickstarter. They said, I believe, late November or early December, and I guess we can keep an eye out for that. But
yeah. Maybe team up with GOG.com. But folks, what do you think? Are you excited about the PC Classic? Do you think it has a chance? Or are you going to just play games on your computer you probably have right now? Let us know what you think.
Hey!